Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of light and shadow across the dining table. I stirred my coffee absently, the dark liquid swirling in slow spirals as I listened to the faint hum of activity from the kitchen. Rebecca moved with purpose, her phone glued to her hand as if it were surgically attached. She laughed softly at something on the screen, then glanced at me with a tight smile. "Busy day today," she said, slipping her phone into her purse. It was a phrase I had heard too often recently, a staple in her growing arsenal of vague excuses. Rebecca, my wife of 8 years, had always been busy. But this was different in the way she rushed out of the house with barely a kiss goodbye, different in the way her phone never left her side. I wanted to believe her, to chalk it up to her demanding career in finance, but my gut said otherwise. The unease had started months ago, subtle at first. Missed dinners turned into overnight work trips. Laughter during late-night phone calls was quickly silenced when I entered the room. I had brushed it off, convincing myself I was overthinking. After all, we were solid, or so I thought. We had built a life together, filled with shared dreams, vacations, and a home that echoed with laughter. But cracks had started to show. It wasn't until the Wawa incident that everything shifted. We were on the highway, headed to Rebecca's parents' house for a weekend visit, when she suddenly asked me to pull over. "I need to use the restroom," she said, her tone brisk. I pulled off at the next exit and parked at a Wawa convenience store. Rebecca hurried out, leaving her phone on the passenger seat in her rush. As I waited, scrolling aimlessly through my own phone, her screen lit up with a notification. The name caught my eye, Thomas, work. For months, Rebecca had been talking about Thomas, a new colleague. She described him as friendly and helpful, someone she had to work closely with on a major project. But something about the way her voice changed when she mentioned him had always set me on edge. I glanced at the message, a harmless act, or so I told myself. But what I read made my blood run cold. "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe." I booked the room. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My pulse quickened as 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Was this a joke? A misunderstanding? My stomach churned as I stared at the phone, willing it to offer some explanation that would make sense. Then, I saw her. Rebecca emerged from the store, sprinting toward the car as though her life depended on it. Her urgency confirmed my fears. I barely had time to set her phone down before she flung the door open and grabbed it. She didn't even look at me as she clutched it tightly, her knuckles white. "What's the rush?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, nothing," she replied, too quickly. "I just remembered I had some surveys to complete for work." I nodded, saying nothing. She avoided my gaze, pretending to check her messages. For the rest of the drive, an uncomfortable silence filled the car, broken only by the sound of the tires on the asphalt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Rebecca snored softly beside me. My mind replayed the message over and over. "Babe. Room." The words taunted me, daring me to confront the reality I had been avoiding. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I began to plan. The days that followed were a haze of quiet observation. Rebecca carried on as though nothing had happened, but I noticed every detail. The way she kept her phone face down on the table. The extra time she spent getting ready for work. The hushed phone calls in the bathroom. I needed proof. Hard evidence. Without it, any accusation I made could be turned against me, dismissed as paranoia. So, I started digging. Late at night, when Rebecca was fast asleep, I unlocked her phone. We had shared passwords for years, a sign of trust that now felt like a cruel joke. I scrolled through her messages, but Thomas's thread was conspicuously empty. Deleted, no doubt. Her email was similarly scrubbed clean, and her call logs offered no clues. Frustrated but undeterred, I turned to our phone bill. It took some effort, but I finally found what I was looking for: hours of calls to a number with a familiar area code. Thomas's, I was sure of it. It wasn't enough. I needed something concrete, something undeniable. So, I decided to track her. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One morning, Rebecca casually mentioned a weekend work trip. She spoke of it as though it were routine, detailing the agenda in her usual efficient manner. But her words felt rehearsed, calculated. "Where's the trip this time?" I asked, feigning disinterest. "Just the city," she replied. "A client needs some hand-holding. I'll be back Sunday evening." I nodded, hiding the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Have fun." As soon as she left for work, I retrieved a small GPS tracker I had purchased online. It was no bigger than a matchbox, discreet and easy to hide. I slipped it into the glove compartment of her car, where it would remain undetected. If she was meeting Thomas, I would know exactly where. That Friday, Rebecca kissed me goodbye, her lips brushing against my cheek with practiced ease. "Don't wait up," she said, grabbing her overnight bag. I watched her drive away, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. This was it. The moment of truth. I opened the tracking app on my phone and waited for the first ping. By noon, the tracker showed her at a luxury hotel downtown. My suspicions were confirmed. As I sat in my car outside the hotel, I tried to steady my breathing. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and my mind raced with conflicting emotions. Anger. Hurt. Betrayal. But also, a cold determination. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. I needed to play this carefully. There was still one card left to play, and I was going to use it. For now, I simply watched the building, the tracker glowing on my screen. Rebecca's betrayal was no longer a question. It was a fact. And I would make sure she never forgot it. The hotel lobby was a polished sea of marble and gold accents, a picture of luxury that felt both foreign and hollow. I lingered near a row of armchairs, feigning interest in a travel brochure as I observed the comings and goings of the clientele. My heart pounded in rhythm with the elegant chandelier swaying gently overhead. Rebecca's car was parked in the underground garage, confirmed by the GPS tracker. She hadn't left the building since arriving. My stomach churned at the thought of what she might be doing, and with whom. Every second of waiting amplified the ache of betrayal. But I wasn't here for a confrontation. Not yet. I was here to set the stage. The idea struck me like lightning during the drive to the hotel. Barging in without a plan would only lead to chaos, and chaos wouldn't give me the resolution I needed. I needed the truth laid bare, undeniable and exposed for what it was. So, I stopped at a local electronics store, picking up a hidden recording device and a small camera. They were compact, easy to conceal, tools of the trade for situations like this, or so the clerk said as he handed me the receipt. Armed with these devices, I approached the front desk. "Good afternoon, sir," the receptionist greeted me, her smile as polished as her surroundings. "Good afternoon," I replied, mirroring her pleasant tone. "I'm supposed to meet my wife here, but I forgot which room she's in. Could you help me out?" Her expression faltered slightly. "Do you have a reservation name?" "Rebecca Morgan," I said smoothly, offering my own smile. She mentioned leaving my name at the desk, just in case I arrived first. The receptionist hesitated but nodded, tapping away at her keyboard. After a moment, she looked up. "Room 508. Would you like me to ring her?" "No need," I said quickly, slipping her a $20 bill. "I'll surprise her." She nodded, and I made my way to the elevator, my heart hammering against my ribcage. The hallway outside room 508 was eerily silent, save for the muffled sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. I slipped the recording device out of my pocket, activating it before carefully placing it near the door. My hands trembled as I taped the camera inside a decorative sconce, its lens angled discreetly toward the door. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the polished wood. Part of me wanted to burst through, to catch them in the act. But the other part, the rational part, knew that patience would yield better results. With the devices in place, I retreated to a nearby coffee shop to wait. Hours passed, marked only by the occasional ding of the hotel tracker app. Rebecca remained in the same location, and my imagination filled in the blanks. My coffee had long gone cold by the time the tracker finally showed movement. I watched as her location shifted, moving toward the hotel's parking garage. I hurried back to my car, parked just down the block. From the shadows of my seat, I watched Rebecca emerge with Thomas. They walked side by side, close but not touching. Yet even from a distance, their chemistry was undeniable. She smiled at him, her head tilting just so, a gesture I had seen countless times before, only now it wasn't for me. They didn't see me as they got into his car and drove away. I followed at a safe distance, my knuckles white as I gripped the wheel. The destination was another hotel, this one smaller and less ostentatious. They parked, and I watched as Rebecca reached across the console, her hand resting briefly on Thomas's arm. He leaned in, saying something that made her laugh before they exited the vehicle. I didn't follow them inside. There was no need. The pieces had already fallen into place. Instead, I returned home, my mind racing with what to do next. The evidence was mounting, undeniable in its clarity. But this wasn't just about Rebecca's betrayal, it was about reclaiming my life and ensuring she couldn't twist the narrative. That night, I set my plan in motion. Rebecca returned home late, her hair slightly mussed, the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne clinging to her clothes. I sat in the living room, pretending to scroll through my phone as she walked in. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. "Yeah, it was a busy one. Did you get everything sorted with the client?" She nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "Yes, everything went well. I'm exhausted, though. I'm going to shower and head to bed." I watched her retreat down the hall, my anger simmering beneath the surface. But I said nothing. Not yet. The following morning, while Rebecca was at work, I retrieved the recordings from the previous day. I sat at my desk, my hands trembling as I plugged the devices into my computer. The video feed was clear, capturing Rebecca and Thomas as they left the room together. Their laughter echoed faintly through the recording, a cruel reminder of their shared intimacy. The audio, however, was what truly gutted me. Their voices were muffled but distinct, a mixture of laughter, flirtation, and whispered promises. I listened as Rebecca spoke of their plans for future rendezvous, her tone light and carefree. My chest tightened with every word. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the ease with which she lied, the casual dismissal of everything we had built together. I copied the files onto a flash drive, then stored it in a locked drawer. My proof was complete. All that remained was the final confrontation. By the time Rebecca returned home that evening, I was ready. I greeted her with a smile, my demeanor calm and collected. She didn't suspect a thing as we sat down for dinner, exchanging pleasantries about our day. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. "You know," I said casually, "I was thinking we should take a weekend trip. Just the two of us." Rebecca blinked, surprised. "That sounds nice. Where were you thinking?" "Somewhere quiet," I replied, my voice steady. "Away from distractions." She smiled, but there was hesitation in her eyes. "I'll check my schedule." I nodded, filing her response away for later. The pieces were falling into place, and soon enough, Rebecca would realize that the game was over. The house was quiet as I sat at the dining table, staring at the flash drive in my hand. The weight of it felt almost symbolic, a tangible representation of the truth I had uncovered. Rebecca's betrayal was no longer a suspicion, it was a documented reality. The recordings were raw, damning, and painfully clear. Tonight, everything would come to light. Rebecca was due home soon. She had called earlier, her voice cheerful as she talked about an upcoming project at work. The casual lies made my skin crawl, but I kept my responses neutral, not wanting to tip her off. This was her last chance to come clean on her own. If she didn't, I would ensure there was no room left for denial. The door creaked open, and Rebecca stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She looked tired but composed, her face lighting up briefly when she saw me. "Hey," she said, setting her bag on the counter. "You're home early." "I wanted to talk," I replied, keeping my tone even. She froze for a fraction of a second, her smile faltering. "Oh. What about? Why don't you sit down?" I gestured to the chair across from me. Rebecca hesitated, her eyes searching mine for a clue to what was coming. Finally, she sank into the chair, folding her hands neatly on the table. "What's going on, Mark?" she asked, her voice laced with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. I slid the flash drive across the table. "I think you know." Her gaze flicked to the drive, then back to me. "What's this?" "Proof," I said simply. "Of you. Of Thomas. Of everything." Rebecca's face turned pale, her confident mask cracking as she reached for the flash drive. Her hands trembled slightly as she held it, but she didn't look at me. "Mark, I don't know what you think you found." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice firm. "I don't want to hear another lie." Her mouth opened, then closed. She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock and fear. "Do you want to hear it?" I asked, pulling my laptop onto the table. "Do you want to watch it together? Listen to the things you said?" Rebecca's lips parted as if to protest, but no words came out. Instead, she slumped back in her chair, the fight draining from her. "How long has it been going on?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "How long have you been lying to me?" She swallowed hard, her hands clutching the edge of the table. "A few months." "Months?" I repeated, anger flaring in my chest. "How many months, Rebecca? And don't you dare lie to me." "6, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. 6 months of deceit. 6 months of sneaking around while I sat at home, oblivious. The rage bubbled to the surface, but I forced myself to take a deep breath. "Why?" I asked, my voice cold. "What was it about him that made you throw away everything we built?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't like that, Mark. I didn't mean for it to happen." "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, incredulous. "You planned trips. You lied to my face. Don't tell me it just happened." She wiped at her eyes, her hands shaking. "I was lonely, okay? You've been so distant lately. Always working, always distracted. I felt invisible. The excuse only fueled my anger. So your solution was to find someone else? To cheat? To betray me?" "I didn't know what else to do," she sobbed. "I didn't think you cared anymore." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "That's your justification? That I didn't care? Do you know how hard I've worked to provide for us? How much I've sacrificed?" Rebecca looked down, her tears falling silently onto the table. For a moment, the room was filled with nothing but the sound of her quiet sobs and the ticking of the clock. "I was willing to forgive you once," I said finally, my voice steady but hard. "I was willing to try and fix this for the sake of what we had. But not now. Not after this. Her head shot up, panic flashing in her eyes. Mark, please. Don't say that. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll do anything. It's too late, I replied, standing up. You made your choice. And now I'm making mine. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Rebecca begged, pleaded, and cried, but my decision was final. I handed her the divorce papers I had prepared earlier that week, watching as she stared at them in disbelief. You can stay here tonight, I said coldly. But by tomorrow, I want you out. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Mark, please. Don't do this. I love you. You should have thought about that before you decided to cheat, I said, turning away. I left the room without another word, heading to the guest bedroom where I had already packed my things. As I closed the door behind me, the weight on my chest began to lift. For the first time in months, I felt free. The following morning, Rebecca was gone when I woke up. Her car was missing from the driveway, and a hastily written note sat on the kitchen counter. It was filled with apologies and promises to change, but I didn't bother reading past the first line. Her words meant nothing now. I picked up my suitcase and walked out the door, leaving the house and the shattered remains of our marriage behind. 2 weeks passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and endless explanations to friends and family. Rebecca had tried reaching out a few times, but I ignored her messages. My focus was on moving forward, reclaiming my life from the wreckage she left behind. I found a small but comfortable apartment on the other side of town, a blank slate that was refreshingly free of memories. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the pain lingered. The anger had started to fade, leaving an ache that felt like a hollow space inside me. I thought about what Rebecca said during our confrontation, about feeling invisible, neglected. Despite everything, part of me wondered if I had contributed to the distance that had grown between us. One rainy evening, as I was unpacking the last box in my new place, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, expecting another spam call. Hello. Mark. The voice on the other end was low and hesitant. It's Thomas. I froze, gripping the phone tightly. What do you want? I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, he said quickly, but I think there's something you need to know. Unless it's an apology for ruining my marriage, I'm not interested. It's not about that, he said, his voice tinged with urgency. It's about Rebecca. She lied to both of us. What are you talking about? I snapped, my anger flaring again. She wasn't just seeing me, Thomas admitted. I found out last week. There's another guy, a client from her work. She's been juggling both of us this whole time. The words hit me like a truck, knocking the air from my lungs. You're lying. I wish I was, Thomas said bitterly. I confronted her, and she didn't even deny it. She said it wasn't serious with either of us, just distractions. I thought you deserved to know. My mind reeled as I tried to process what he was saying. The betrayal, already a gaping wound, suddenly felt deeper. I ended the call without another word, the phone slipping from my hand onto the couch. Rebecca's affair wasn't just a mistake, it was a calculated, selfish pursuit of something I could never provide. Whatever shred of guilt I had felt evaporated in that moment. She wasn't the person I thought she was. Not even close. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of clarity. I had spent too much time dwelling on the past, but now it was time to move forward. I made a list of things I had always wanted to do but never had the time for: traveling, taking up photography, volunteering. My life was no longer tied to Rebecca's choices, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of excitement. But life wasn't done surprising me yet. It was a Thursday evening when I decided to go for a run. The rain had cleared, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the streetlights. As I jogged through the park near my apartment, I noticed a woman sitting alone on a bench. Her head was bowed, her long dark hair falling like a curtain around her face. Something about her seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. I slowed down, debating whether to keep going or stop. Before I could decide, she looked up, her tear-streaked face catching the light. It was Charlotte. Charlotte had been one of Rebecca's closest friends, someone I had always liked but rarely saw after Rebecca's affairs began dominating our lives. She looked at me with a mix of surprise and embarrassment, quickly wiping her face. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling. "Charlotte." I stopped, catching my breath. "What are you doing here?" She shrugged, trying to smile. "Thinking. Or at least trying to." I hesitated, then sat beside her on the bench. "Rough night?" "Something like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just found out my boyfriend's been cheating on me. 3 years down the drain." I stared at her, the irony not lost on me. "I'm sorry." She laughed bitterly. "Thanks. But it's not like I didn't see it coming." We sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the park fading into the background. Finally, Charlotte turned to me, her eyes red but steady. "What about you? How's Rebecca?" she asked cautiously. "She's not in the picture anymore," I said simply. Charlotte nodded, her expression softening. "I'm sorry, Mark. You didn't deserve that." Neither of us spoke for a moment, the weight of our shared experiences settling between us. Finally, I stood, offering her a hand. "Come on," I said. "Let's get out of here. I know a place that serves the best coffee in town." She looked up at me, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "Why not?" As we walked away from the bench, I felt something shift, a small but significant change. Life had a way of knocking you down, but it also had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. This wasn't the ending I had imagined, but maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something better.